All right, number one. In the early 1800s, the Cherokee scholar Sequoyah created the first scriptural writing system for an indigenous language in the United States. Because it represented the sounds of spoken Cherokee so accurately, his script was easy to learn and thus quickly achieved blank use. Well, if it was easy to learn, by 1830, over 90% of the Cherokee people could read and write it. All right, I'm going to say tons of. It achieved tons of use because it was easy to learn. 90% of Cherokee people could read and write it. Sounds pretty popular. So, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? Well, widespread looks good. It achieved tons of use, and 90% of people who were Cherokee used it. That's pretty widespread, so I'm going to say that's a strong contender for the right answer. Next, we got careful. I'm not loving that too much. There's really nothing in the text that implies careful. Just going to cross that out. Unintended. Nope. It is a writing system from a scholar that was very easy to learn, and 90% of people use it. Sounds very intended, the complete opposite. And infrequent, nope, because once again, 90% of people use it, 90% of Cherokee people use it. That's pretty frequent. So we're going to go with answer choice A for number one. All right, number two. When Mexican American archaeologist Zelia Maria Magdalena Nuttall published her 1886 research paper on sculptures found in the indigenous city of Techichuan, present-day Mexico, other researchers readily blanked her work as groundbreaking. Okay, so immediately I think viewed as the answer that could go there. They viewed her work as groundbreaking. Recognition, it's positive, and it was a convincing demonstration, so it did its job very well. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? Okay, so acknowledge, viewed, so they saw her work as groundbreaking, they acknowledged it as groundbreaking, makes sense. I like A. They ensured her work as groundbreaking. I wouldn't say that. That doesn't make sense that they guaranteed her work was groundbreaking. Nowhere in the text does it imply that they had any influence on what her work was or changing other people's minds about it, because that would be a way to guarantee or ensure it was groundbreaking. So I'm going to say no to B. They denied her work as groundbreaking. No, I think that's the opposite. It's a recognition, and she had a convincing demonstration. So it seems that they did view it as groundbreaking, and they underestimated her work as groundbreaking. Well, nowhere does it apply that there would be a reason to underestimate it. They never mentioned that maybe she didn't complete it very well or her past work was bad. I don't think D is the perfect fit. I think acknowledged is the best answer for number two. All right, number three. Like other tribal nations, the Muskogee Creek Nation is self governing. Its national council generates laws regulating aspects of community life, such as land use and healthcare, while the principal chief and cabinet officials blank those laws by devising policies and administering services in accordance with them. Hmm. I think create, or maybe I'd say, yeah, they enforce, I think is a better. They enforce those laws because they devise policies and administer the services in accordance. So they generate laws, and to enforce those laws, I think I want to take out create because this is where create would go. Create the regulating aspects, but and they would enforce those aspects. So if you can't see that, my guess word is enforce those laws by devising policies and administering services in accordance with them. So, which choice completes the text in the most logical, precise word or phrase? So, implement is pretty good. I like that one. It's very similar to enforce. They implement them and they devise policies. Yep, I think A would fit. They presume those laws by devising policies. I don't think there's any hint that they presume them, they're assuming them. Yeah, because they generate the laws. B doesn't. I don't think C is correct. They don't improvise them. They don't, do them on a whim because they're generated. The regulating aspects of community life, like land use and healthcare, they're not improvising that on a whim. There's chiefs and cabinets. There's probably a whole process. And then mimic those laws. I don't think they're mimicking them because it is their laws. They're not copying them in any way. So I'd say D is wrong, and I see A is the correct answer for that one. All right, number four. In the indigenous intercropping system known as Three Sisters, maize, squash, and beans form a blank web of relations. Hmm. Beneficial? Maize provides the structure on which the bean vines to grow. See, they help each other. The squash vines cover the soil, discouraging competition from weeds. And the beans aid their two sisters by enriching the soil with essential nitrogen. All right, let's see the answer choices. Indecipherable. Indecipherable. I pronounced that so badly. Seems pretty decipherable. Wait, that's supposed to be an X. Don't pay attention to that. Because they just broke it down here. So I'm not gonna say A. Ornamental? Doesn't seem because ornamental implies it's for beauty, it's to look good, it's just decoration. That's why they call them ornaments. I'm gonna say no because it seems that it has a much bigger purpose than just to be pretty, because it provides it with essential nitrogen or discourages weeds. I'm not gonna say obscure. Well, it doesn't seem obscure because once again they know exactly what it is. So I'm gonna say C's out. Maybe intricate. That's the last one left, but it does make sense that this could get a little bit complex because they each do different things to benefit the other. And it's described as a web, and webs are intricate. You ever see a spider web? It's like a million lines. And so it's intercropping, interwoven, a web. Yeah, so I'm gonna go with D as the correct answer. I really like that one. All right, number five. The artisans of the Igun Ormamum Guild in Benin City, Nigeria, typically blank the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down through their families since the 13th century. They don't strictly observe every tradition. Ugh, observe every tradition. For example, guild members now use air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows to help heat their forges. I think it would be practice. And I think why I think that is usually practice a technique so that word fits. And clearly they're doing it because this implies, but they don't strictly observe every tradition. So it means they do observe the tradition because they're not doing every single part of it. And so practice is a synonym for observe. So that makes sense. And this is just an example of them doing it. They use air conditioned motors or air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows, but that means they are doing it. So practice is a good bet. So let's look at the answer choices. Okay, they experiment with, adhere to, improve on, or grapple with. Okay, so practice wasn't very useful this time. I would say experiment with, maybe, you know, they experiment with the bronze and brass casting techniques. They don't do every tradition, and they use air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows. Okay, well, that's them trying something new. Adhere to, they typically adhere to the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down through their family since the 13th century. I like adhere to. I like that one too. C, improve on. They typically improve on the brass casting techniques that have been passed down through the families. I don't think it's C. I don't think that fits because I don't think it's improving on it because they don't talk about how it was improved. It just shows that they do something different. So they improve on the bronze and brass casting techniques that have been passed down, but they don't strictly observe every tradition. I think this sentence right here disproves the improve because they wouldn't if they improve on it, then it's implied they wouldn't strictly observe every tradition because they're changing it all the time. So C's out. And then to grapple with, they typically grapple with the bronze and brass casting techniques. I don't think that fits with either because that implies that they had trouble with it, and then nowhere in the text does it imply that the reason they don't observe every tradition is because it's difficult. So grapple implies that it's difficult. And I'm going to say no to that one. So we're left with A and B. Well, I put practice, and practice could be fit with follows, observes, or adhere to are all things you could put in that box. And I think whatever's going to be in the blank is going to be a synonym to observe. So I'm going to say adhere to is the correct answer because once again, it's not saying, it doesn't imply that they are experimenting because I would kind of go with improve on where they're trying different ideas out and more just is implying that they don't follow it to a T, but they do it. I don't think this passage is really discussing how they're improving, experimenting, or trying new things out. I think it's more just talking about that they do the techniques and maybe they don't do them to the T, exactly how their tradition says. And it says like maybe they use air conditioning motors instead of handheld bellows. So I think B is a much more likely answer, and that's why. Some economic historians blank that late 19th and early 20th century households in the United States experienced an economy of scale when it came to food purchases. They assumed that large households spent less on food per person than did small households. Economist Trevor Logan showed, however, that a close look at the available data disproves this supposition. So some economic historians believed they believed that late 19th and early 20th century households in the United States experienced an economy of scale when it came to yeah. So they believed this, but he showed is implies because he is doing what the historians did, that a close look, and it's a supposition, so belief. Which choice completes the text in the most logical and precise word or phrase? Surmised, contrived, questioned, or regretted? Surmised, I like surmised. That kind of means that maybe they didn't have, that means if you came up with an idea but didn't have info to support it or didn't have evidence. And then sounds a lot like what happened, because yeah, because he looked at the data and he had the evidence to say it probably wasn't true. So I like A. Contrived, I don't think contrived. Maybe that means like it seems artificial or unrealistic is what contrived means, like they're making it up. But economic historians don't really contrive that late 19th and early 20th century households in the United States. That just sounds wrong, and I don't think it's necessarily entirely accurate. I don't think they questioned it because that's what Trevor Logan is doing, and it's however is implied that it was different than what people previously had thought, and then regretted. I don't think they regretted that late 19th and early 20th century households had economy of scale food purchases. They didn't regret that at all. So I think A, surmised makes the most sense here because they came to the conclusion without proper evidence, and that's why Trevor Logan disproved it. And that would just make a lot of sense. So A is the correct answer. All right, number 7. The work of Kiowa painter T.C. Cannon derives its power in part from the tension among its blank influences. Okay, so tension, power. Those are some adjectives thrown in there. So it's made up of classic European portraiture, noise, with its realistic treatment of faces, American pop art movement with its vivid colors and flat style, intertribal painting style that rejects the effect of depth, typically achieved through shading and perspective. All right, so immediately what I'm thinking is diverse. It's multiple different styles, European, American, flat style, with different styles in between, faces, vivid colors, no depth. So let's look at the answer choices. So immediately we get complementary, maybe. I don't really know that's the tone of the art. So when things are complementary, they kind of make up for, you know, other things' deficiencies. So they make it look beautiful. That's how I would describe something that was complementary. Like the colors that you're wearing very complement each other very well. Well, but this isn't really described as pretty. It's more like the art is described as powerful. and it creates a ton of tension. So it works. You could put it in there. I just don't think it's the best answer so far. I mean, I don't know. It's not perfect, but B, unknown. Well, I don't think that's right at all because these are very known. We've just talked about all the different types of styles, and nowhere does it mention that they're unknown influences. We know exactly what they are. They're listed. Oh, spirit. Yeah, pretty good. Kind of means just dissimilar. I don't know if I spelled that right. Two S's. Dissimilar. There we go. Yeah, because it basically means different. They're unlike each other. They're all different. And yeah, these are all pretty different. This is one of those knowledge ones. You kind of need to know what this means, but because complementary is pretty tricky. I didn't think it was complementary because they create tension and power, not really make it beautiful. But this is pretty good because this is way more descriptive because they are very different and unlike each other, each of the influences, faces, vivid colors, and then rejects the effect of depth. There's really nothing how they're alike each other, and they create tension and power. So I don't really think it's complementary. I really like C now. I think that's the best answer. And interchangeable, no, they are very different, and things that are different aren't really interchangeable. So I'm going to say D is the correct answer. Or, yeah, sorry about that. C is the correct answer. All right, number 8. New and interesting research conducted by, nope, is inspired by their observations that though there have been many studies of the effect of high altitude on blood chemistry, there is a blank studies on the effect of blood chemistry living in locations below sea level. All right, so immediately I'm seeing lack of because though many studies. This kind of implies it's the opposite of many studies, or else there wouldn't have been like, though there have been many studies, there is many studies. That doesn't really make sense. But though there have been many studies, there is a lack of studies. Makes a lot more sense. So I think it's something up along the lines of there haven't been many studies on the effect of blood chemistry in a word that would, describe that. So let's look at the answer choices. These are a little more complex than what you would normally see. Immediately, I know quarrel. Quarrel means to argue, to have a fight, disagreement. There is a quarrel of studies. Doesn't really make sense. You don't disagree about a literal fact about of how many studies are made. A's out. Paucity. Paucity looks good. That usually means a insufficient amount or lack of. So I really like that one. And then we have profusion of. Profusion. Profusion means that there's too many. Maybe that's not what it exactly means, but I know it's along those lines. These aren't words you use every day. It's more just general vocab. I've seen it before. It means like too many or a sufficient amount, enough, along those lines. So I'm gonna take out C. And verisimilitude, that means something along the lines of something that is. I'm searching my memory banks. I can think true, like it's prophetic. I don't think it relates to this at all. But I think it's like foreshadowing. It makes something appear true. So when you imply something as truth. So I mean, but like overall, you can Google all these words. D is definitely out. I think D is a very unrelated one. This is a difficult word question. I'm gonna go with B for this one, but that's solely because I've seen these words before. Um, this would be very much a if you don't know what these words, use as much context clues as you can. But if you're stuck and you straight up do not know the definitions, you know, they call it pick your word of the day. And so don't spend too much time on this problem. Don't waste your time trying to remember words that you've never seen before. Skip it, maybe throw a letter that you like, B, C, D, and then move on and go tackle the problems that you know how to do so you don't waste all the time. All right, number 9. Following text from Sarah of Jewett, Martha's lady. Martha is employed by Miss Pine as a maid. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? All right, we're looking for the purpose of the text. Miss Pine sat by the window watching, in her best dress, looking stately and calm. She seldom went out, and it was almost time for the carriage. Okay, so it looks like she's going out. She doesn't like going out. That's what I read. Martha was just coming in from the garden with strawberries, with more flowers in her apron. It was a bright, cool evening in June. The golden robins sang in the elms, and the sun was going down behind the apple trees at the foot of the garden. The beautiful old house stood wide open to the long expected guest. So what's happening is she's waiting in her best dressed. She doesn't go out very often. And then Martha is coming in with strawberries in her apron, and they describe the setting, and they show that they're waiting for a guest. So I think it's more of setting the scene. So let's see. To convey worries brought about by a new guest. I don't think anyone's worrying. She's stately and calm. To describe how the characters have changed over time, no, because it doesn't really show them beginning to end. I just think that's a completely wrong answer. To contrast the activity indoors with the stillness outside. I don't think it's very still because the sun's going down, robins are singing, so stillness outside, it's not still outside. And also, I just don't think that's the purpose. To depict the setting as the characters wait for the visitor's arrival, yes, because once again, this is just describing a setting. It's giving you information about what Miss Pine is doing, what Martha is doing, what's happening outside, and what everyone is doing in the meantime while waiting for the guest. D is the correct answer. All right, number 10. Astronomers are. Okay, well, we're looking for which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the text. All right, so let's find the purpose of the sentence. Astronomers are confident the star B will eventually consume all the helium in its core and explode into supernova. So we got a star, it's going to be a supernova. They are much less confident, however, about when this will happen, since that depends on the internal characteristics of B that are largely unknown. All right, so astrophysicist Sarafina El-Badri Nance and colleagues recently investigated whether acoustic waves in the star could be used to determine internal stellar states, but concluded that this method cannot sufficiently reveal B's internal characteristics. All right, so this is what they're confident in. So they know this will happen, but they don't know this. So the reason this is here is because I think it sets up the next part of the paragraph because it just discusses why they started using the acoustic waves, because it's to find out the answer about this, about how to find when they're going to blow up and become a supernova. So let's look at the answer choices. It explains how the work of Nance and colleagues was received by others in the field. No, because this doesn't mention anyone else in the field, just whether that they're confident that they don't know when it's going to blow up. It presents the central finding report. Nope, because I think that's honestly this point. This point represents the central finding. It identifies the problem that Nance and colleagues attempted to solve, but not. Yes, I think so, because once again, it's setting up this part, and that's the issue. That's what they're trying to find out. It describes a serious limitation of the method. Nope, because it doesn't talk about the methodology because it comes before that and still doesn't talk about it. So C is the correct and only right answer. Number 11. The following text is from Jane Austen's 1811 novel, Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor lives with her younger sisters and her mother, Miss Dashwood. So according to the text, what is true about Eleanor? So we're looking about statements about Eleanor. So she's the oldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding and coolness of judgment. So she gave great advice, although 19, to be a counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract to the advantage of them all, which that eagerness of mind in Miss Dashwood, and so Miss Dashwood's her mom, stated above, which must generally have led to imprudence. She had an excellent heart. Okay, so she had great judgment, so that let her give her judgment to her mother. She had a great heart, her disposition was affectionate, and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. So she was very emotional, but stoic as well. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet learned. So her mom's different, which one of her sisters had resolved never been taught. Okay, so according to the text, what's true about Eleanor? She often argues with her mother but fails to change her mind. No, because it states actually that she is a counselor to her mother to the advantage of them all. Eleanor can be overly sensitive. Nope, because her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them, meaning she had control over her feelings, so she was not sensitive. Eleanor thinks her mother is a bad role model. I don't think that's true. I don't think they really stated that anywhere in the text whether she was a bad role model or not. They just mentioned that her mom wasn't quite like her. She's remarkably mature for her age. Yes. So it's definitely going to be D because though only 19, so they're already implying that because even though she is young, which makes sense here, she's a counselor of her mother, which is a sign of maturity. All of this are really just describing signs of maturity, control over your emotions. She gave great advice, coolness of judgment, etc. So D is the correct answer. All right, number 12. Believing that living in. Okay, well, let's look. Before we start reading, always read the question. Which choice best states the main idea? So I'm looking for the main idea of the text. Believing that living in an impractical space can heighten awareness and even improve health. Conceptual artists. So the design. So this is a statement, and I think this is going to be the reasoning behind it. They designed an apartment building in Japan to be more fanciful than functional. Kitchen counter is chest high on one side and knee high on the other, and a ceiling has a door to nowhere. The effect is disorientating but invigorating. After 4 years there, they were reported significant health benefits. So I think this is really just talking about the main idea is that they built an impractical living space and it gave them supported health benefits and it was just describing their living space and that it should give them health benefits. So let's read the answer choices. Although inhabiting a home surrounded by fanciful features, such as those designed by Jins and it can be unsustainable. No, that's definitely not the purpose. They never once talked about how it was unsustainable. Designing disorienting spaces like those in Jin's and Akroma's building is the most effective way to create a physically stimulating environment. I don't think so. It doesn't really talk about how it's stimulating at all, just that they have improved health benefits. As a filmmaker, Yamakoya has long supported designs of conception. Nope. The main purpose is definitely not what Yamakoi does as an artist. And then D, although impractical, the design of the apartment buildings by G and A may improve the well-being of residents. Yes, that is the point of the article because it talks about how it improves health. They talk about the design and they talk about once again the health benefits because of it. So D is the correct answer. All right, number 13. In a research paper's, once again, read the question before the paragraph. Which quotation from a work by a historian would best illustrate the student's claim? So we're going to look for the student's claim in this, and this will be the evidence supporting it. So let's read. In a research paper, a student criticizes some historians of modern African politics, claiming that they have evaluated Patrice Lumumba, the first prime minister of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, primarily as a symbol rather in terms of his actions. Okay, so his claim in this is that they view him as a symbol rather than in terms of his actions because he's criticizing them for it. So therefore, he believes he should be viewed in terms of his actions rather than as a symbol, in that historians usually view him as a symbol rather than actions. Yada yada. All right. Number A, letter A. Geez. Lumbaba is a difficult figure to evaluate due to starkly conflicting opinions he inspired during his life. No, because that doesn't comment about how other people view him and how the student views him. The availability information makes it clear that Lumumba's political beliefs and values were largely consistent throughout his career. No, because once again, it doesn't talk about how people viewed him or his actions or whether he's a symbol versus actions, etc. Lumumba's practical accomplishments can be passed over quickly. It is mainly as the personification of Congolese independence that he warrants scholarly attention. Ooh, I like C because it talks about no one's paying attention to his accomplishments, which also, are actions, but it's a personification of independence that war. Yes. So they're rather symbolic, making him a symbol. They're personifying the independence through him. And then D, many questions remain. So I like this one, but many questions remain about L's ultimate vision as an independent Congo. These questions are likely to remain unanswered. No, because they're not really talking about his vision or any questions that people may have. It's just really unrelated to the claim entirely. So I'm going to say C is the correct answer through the accomplishments and personification. All right, number 14. Let's look at the question first. Which choice most effectively uses data from the graph to complete the example? So let's look at the example. Geographer AOE and his colleagues surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Nigeria. All right, so this is going to be the claim right here. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops and even constituted the majority. Okay, so we're looking for a majority of farmers who cultivated those crops, for instance. All right, so really our claim is that female farmers were prominent in specific crops and they were the majority in some cultivated crops. For instance, so let's look at where they're the majority in this graph. So female farmers percentage of total. So the majority is going to be anything over 50% because that looks like what it is. And it looks like that these two, they're way less than half. So those are the minority. But over here for the non-root vegetables, it looks like this is where they're the majority. And it looks like that, which ones are over 50? It would be only for the South and North Ondo, where they're the majority of non-root vegetable crop growers. So let's look and see if that's reflected in any of the answer choices. So we have A, most farmers who mainly cultivated cereals, and most farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in South Ondo were women. So most of the farmers in South Ondo, well, it says cereals. So most of the farmers who cultivated cereals were women in South Ondo. Well, that's not true because cereals, well, only 35%, 36% women, so they're not even the majority. So A is a liar. A is just not right. B, more women in Central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereals. Let's look. Root crops, cereals. I mean, while this is true, it doesn't support the claim. So we're going to move on to C. Most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. Okay, well, is this true? This is true that most of the women in North and South Ondo did cultivate non-root vegetables, more women than men. So yeah, C is true, and I think C supports the claim incredibly well because it's talking about when women were the majority of the crop growers for a specific type of crop in a specific area, North and South Ondo, and it's true. But we're going to check out D, a relatively equal proportion of women across the 3 regions of Ondo mainly cultivated cereals. This has nothing to do with majority, just that an equal amount of women made the cereals. This doesn't support the claim, so C is definitely going to be the correct answer here. All right, number 15. Which finding, if true, would most directly weaken the astronomer's claim? So we're going to look for the claim, and then we're going to look for an answer choice that is the opposite of it. So, given that stars and planets initially formed from the same gas and dust in space, some astronomers have posited that host stars such as the Sun and their planets are composed of the same materials, with the planets containing equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. This idea is also supported by evidence that rocky planets in our solar system are composed of the same materials. So the claim is that if they're all if all planets and suns were created from the same gas and dust in space, it would make sense that suns and planets in the same solar system would be made up of the same materials. So that's really the big claim here. Let's look at the answer choices, and we're going to see which one weakens that claim. What's the opposite? What is stating something that is different or contradicting? Most stars are made up of hydrogen and helium, but when cooled, they are revealed to contain small amounts of iron and silicate. Not true. Has nothing to do with the claim, just more information. B. A nearby host star is observed to contain the same proportion of hydrogen and helium that is of the sun. Well, this supports the claim, showing that stars near each other. So the sun and another star are made up of the same thing. So therefore, they were created by the same things, yada yada, supporting the claim, but this does not weaken it. So C, evidence emerges that the amount of iron in some rocky planets is considerably higher than in the amount of their star. Yeah, I agree. Because it says in here that they're composed of the same materials of equal or smaller quantities of the materials that make up the host star. So the host star should have more of the quantity of materials than the planet or rocky planets right here. But this is actually contradicting that or is saying something else that they actually have more than in the star. But let's look at D. The method for determining the composition of rocky planets is discovered to be less effective when used to analyze other. This doesn't even relate to the claim at all. It's just another method. So I'm going to say C is the correct answer here. All right, number 16. Which finding, if true, would most directly support the argument? All right, so let's look for the main idea and kind of the claim of Paredes' argument. So in the 20th century, ethnographers made a concerted effort to collect Mexican American folklore, but they did not always agree about the origins. Scholars like Orla Espinosa claim that Mexican American folklore derived largely from folklore of Spain, which ruled Mexico in its now southwestern United States from the 16th, 19th. All right, so this is the claim we're going to pay attention to because this is our guy or girl, Americo Paredes. By contrast, argued, while some Spanish influence is undeniable, Mexican American folklore is mainly the product of ongoing interactions of various cultures in Mexico and the United States. So it has nothing to do with Spain, but it's made up of Mexico and the United States and those interactions. So let's see what supports this argument. The folklore that ethnographers collected included several songs written in the form of decima, a type of poem originating in the late Oh, it's originating in Spain. This goes against the claim. So A's out. Much of the folklore that ethnographers collected had similar elements from region to region. I don't really know if that supports the claim. It doesn't really say where that folklore derived from or came from. So we're going to move on to C. Most of the folklore that the ethnographers collected was previously unknown to scholars. I'm going to say no to that one because that one doesn't support or go against the claim. It just talks about random stuff that is unrelated to it. So we're going to ignore it. And we got D. Most of the folklore that ethnographers collected consisted of corridos, ballads from history and social life of a clearly recent origin. Okay, so the recent here talks about the ongoing interactions. So that actually supports that part of the claim. So I'm going to go with D here. And that's why D is the correct answer for 16. All right, number 17. Which choice most logically completes the text? So in the early 19th century, Euro-American farmers in the Northeast US used agricultural techniques developed by H people centuries earlier, but it seemed that few of those farmers had actually seen H farms firsthand. Okay. Barring possibility of several farmers of the same era independently developing techniques that the H people had already invented, these facts are most strongly suggested that. Okay, well, what is it suggesting? Let's look back. Right, well, I think it's suggesting that. Okay, so what it's stating is that these farmers had used the same techniques, but they have never seen these people. So what we're going to be talking about is how they got those techniques. So we can look at answer choice A's. Those farmers learned the techniques by people who were more directly influenced by H practices. Well, this could work. I mean, if you didn't learn it firsthand, that means someone taught you it because it would be kind of crazy they developed the same techniques independently of each other. Clearly they were influenced, but they have never saw them firsthand. So we could logically complete it, the text that, well, they might have not seen it firsthand, but that means someone who had seen them firsthand taught them. So I like A. B, the crops typically cultivated by Euro-American farmers in the northeast United States were not well suited to H farming techniques. That's not true because they used the same, yeah, they used the same techniques as the people. So why would they use those same techniques if they were not well suited? That doesn't make sense. So we're gonna cross that off. I didn't like it. C. H farming techniques were widely used in the regions outside the Northeast. That doesn't make sense because we're talking specifically about the Northeastern United States. We don't really need to talk about what's happening outside of that. That's not the subject of the text. C is kind of bringing in irrelevant information that probably wouldn't be used in that sentence, anyways. D, Euro American farmers only began to recognize the benefits of H farming in the late 19th century. All right, well, let's look. Okay, so in the early, yeah, so they used the same techniques in the early 19th century, so it wouldn't make sense that they didn't see the benefits until the 19th century. And whether they see benefits or not isn't really what they're talking about. It's more talking about how they learned those techniques. Was it through seeing the H farms or was it through other people? I think A is the best answer because it logically completes the text that if they didn't learn it directly, that means they learned it indirectly by maybe people who already knew about how to do it because they had met the H people. So, or the Iroquois. Sorry. So I think A is the right answer. The A completes the text logically. So A is the answer for 17. Number 18. Which choice most logically completes this text? If some artifacts recovered from excavations in the settlement of KK in modern Ghana date from the 13th century CE, they may lend credence to claims that the settlement was founded before or around that time. There is other evidence, however, strongly supporting that the 14th century CE founding date for KK, if both of the artifacts dates and the 14th century CE foundings date are correct, that would imply maybe that. Okay, well, let's see what it implies. Let's look at the text. A. Artifacts in the 14th century CE are more commonly recovered than artifacts from the 13th century CE. No, because the emphasis really is on when they were found, not how many. So commonly doesn't really make sense. So A's out. B, the artifacts originated elsewhere and eventually reached aka through trade or migration. This makes sense. I like that one. Because if they're finding stuff made in the 13th century, but there is strong evidence saying that it was KK or Kulokata was created in the 14th century, how would this have occurred? If stuff was made in the 13th century, but this was found in the 14th century, how did they get that 13th century stuff? Well, it could have been given to them by another nation that was created in the 13th or earlier. They could have given them that stuff. So that's how it would logically, you're looking for logically, how did this occur? That is a logically correct response on how that occurred. So I like B. Kulukata was founded by people from a different region that had previously been assumed. No, because we're talking about that it was founded in the 14th century. That is the assumption we're making if both the artifact dates and the 14th century founding date are correct. So we're in this, we have the assumption that it was created in the 14th century. And this is saying that, well, what if it was created before the 14th century? Well, that doesn't make sense because we just said it was created in the 14th century. So no, C's out. D. Excavations of the Kulokata may have inadvertently damaged some artifacts dating to the 14th century CE. No, because they're saying that it damaged it, but it's not saying that because if you damaged it, it could be seen as an item from an earlier century. I think this is just misleading and it doesn't really it would imply that they damaged some artifacts from the 14th century. Like that doesn't make sense. It's not talking about why there were artifacts from the 13th century. It doesn't complete the text logically. So D's out. I think B is absolutely the correct answer here because it can logically explain why a 14th century society has gear from 13th century. It's because they were given it. That makes a ton of sense. I think B is the correct answer for number 18. All right, number 19. Which choice most logically completes the text? All right, well, let's read the text. Team of biologists, Antonio investigated the mechanism that allows AT, tailcrest plants, accelerate flowering at high temperatures. They replace protein ELF3, similar protein found in other species. Unlike AT, displays no acceleration in flowering with increased temperature. Comparison of unmodified AT plants with altered plants showed no difference in flowering at 22 degrees Celsius, but at 27 degrees Celsius, the unmodified plants exhibited accelerated flowering, while the altered ones did not. Well, this suggests that. Hmm. So, rereading this, I see that what they're looking for is they're investigating what makes these AT plants accelerate flowering at high temperatures. So they replace the protein ELF3 in plants with stiff brome that the normal AT plant. So the plants with stiff brome do not have acceleration in flowering with increased temperature, but the ones with ELF3, which is the AT plant, do. And so obviously when they put it altered plants, so the altered plants showed no difference in flowering at 20 degrees Celsius, but at 27 degrees Celsius, okay, so when they increased the temperature, because remember they flower at high temperatures, the unmodified plants exhibited accelerated flowering, while the altered ones did not. Okay, so it's kind of proving that ELF3 is the reason why they flower at high temperatures, because the plants that had ELF3, so the unmodified plants, bloomed, had accelerated flowering at high temperatures, when the ones with stiff brome over here that were modified plants did not. And that means that, well, if I was going to logically complete this in my head, that L3 is the reason they bloom at high temperatures. So let's read the answer choices. A temperature sensitive accelerated flowering is unique to a T. That's not what they're solving for. They're not trying to find that this flower blooms at high temperatures. They already know that. They're looking at why it blooms at high temperatures. So B, the AT increases ELF3 production as temperature rises. Maybe I'm not loving that answer. ELF3 really is the reason, but I don't know if like ELF3's rise in production is the right answer. But maybe we can process of elimination. It'll be B. But let's look. ELF3 enables AT to respond to increased temperatures. I don't like this one either. I'm not loving these answers. A temperatures of at least 22 degrees Celsius are required for this to flower. No. Because once again, it didn't bloom at 22 degrees Celsius. It did at 27 degrees Celsius. So it needs at least 27 degrees Celsius for, but D is just wrong. So we're in between B and C. None of these really stood out to me, but let me see if I can find a reason why to choose a certain one. AT increase ELF production, and then ELF3 enables AT to. Hmm. I think it's C. I think it's answer C because this is the reason why. This doesn't really explain that ELF3 is the reason why. It's just more of a reaction. It's like, well, it increases in ELF3, but is ELF3 the reason why? And this one more directly states it, or C more directly states it rather than B, that it is ELF3 that enables it to respond to increased temperature. So I think this is the best answer. C is the best answer compared to B because it more directly states that ELF3 is the exact reason it is able to respond to increased temperatures and have that accelerated flowering. All right, number 20. It's going to be a grammar question, so keep an eye out. And automatically looking at the answer choices, this is a non finite versus finite. And honestly, if you really want to go into it, this is probably the answer because I can tell that this is finite. And these are all non finite, both of these. Because having, providing, to provide, and yeah, I'll explain more as we go. A member of the Cherokee Nation, Mary Golda Ross is renowned for her contribution to NASA's Planetary Flight Handbook, which blank detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars and Venus, which provided detailed mathematical guidance for missions to Mars. Yeah, it's gonna be A. You can see because once again it fits the tense of ed is past tense. It's gonna fit it right here. And it's also once again, you don't even have to solve this. You can do the trick of just knowing that these are all non-finite and pick A. If you were in a time crunch, I would still recommend reading the question and making sure. But that's a quick way to do it. And once again, your ability to tell the difference between finite and non-finite, a good trick is starting the sentence with these expressions like non-finite, you can start a sentence with them saying, having provided for the family, the father went to bed. Or to provide for the family, the father works. Providing for the family, the father will go to the work. But provided for the family, you can't say that. You can't say provided for the family. The father, like, that doesn't make sense in your head. So if you read it out in your head, you're going to quickly find the finite and the non-finite words because this can only come at the end. He provided for the family, not provided for the family. He worked. Doesn't make sense. So A is going to be the answer because once again, you can only put a finite verb there. All right, number 21 is going to be testing our grammar. So let's look. Typically, underlined scribbles and notes left in the margins by a former owner lower books blank, so value is what we got. When the former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, such markings known as marginal can be a gold mine to literary scholars. Sweet, so let's look at the answer choices. Value, but, value, 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 but. Okay, cool. So first thing I'm going to do is figure out whether we need this but in there. So typically underlined scribbles and notes left in margins by a former owner lower a book's value. When the former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, such markings known as marginal can be a gold mine to literary scholars. All right, so it looks like we have a main clause here, and we have, what is that? I think it's going to be a subordinate clause. So it's a clause kind of relating back to the main one, but it could stand on its own. But it's there because of the first one, and then this one's going to be another clause. So we're separating clauses. We're going main clause, subordinate clause, to a main clause. The punctuation we're looking for is here. So separating clauses, you need punctuation. You need it. So we know B is wrong because that's going to be a run-on sentence. And I know C is wrong because you can't separate clauses with a comma. You can't. So that's a rule in grammar. So that's going to be a comma splice. So if you're looking at these clauses and you know they're clauses because they more or less can stand on their own, you know the first one's a main clause because typically underlined scribbles and notes left in the margins by a former owner lower a book's value. That's a complete sentence. And when a former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, such markings known as marginal could be a gold mine to literary scholars. That can also stand on its own, and that's why they're clauses. This is a subordinate clause because it's relating back to the first one, even though it could stand on its own. If you said when the former owner is a famous poet like Walt Whitman, you wouldn't, if that didn't have the first sentence, you wouldn't know what they meant by when the former owner is a famous poet. So it needs it, but it can stand on its own. There could be a period there. So we're looking for, so now we know there needs to be a but what comes before a but? Well, we know a comma usually comes before the but, and if you want to be all fancy, the but is a coordinating conjunction, but you know that there needs to be a comma there for most times you use but, so A is going to be the correct answer. All right, number 22. This is going to be another grammar question down here. After the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes equivalent to a few cents on single-use plastic grocery bags in 2011, plastic bag consumption decreased up to 99. Okay, so we got percent. Such taxes are subject to what economists call a rebound effect. All right, so these are totally complete sentences. Here and here. So I know that, and they're also, I mean, if you want to call them main clauses, but they're more main clauses. They're a series of main clauses. Because such taxes are what we call a rebound effect as the change became normalized plastic bags. So it's a series. So this alone has two main clauses in it, and that's why we're calling it a sentence. And same with up top after the United Kingdom began rolling out taxes, plastic bag consumption degree. Okay, well this is just one, but this is multiple. And so since we have so many, we have multiple sentences within this paragraph. So immediately A's out because since this colon's here, it would just be a comma splice and be too long. And then definitely no punctuation's absolutely wrong. So we're between B and C. And I would say it's C. Because if you put and in there, it would just be way too long of a sentence. Even with the and, it would seem like a run on. So, like, if you read this in your head, you would say, wow, that's a really long sentence. And that heavily implies that you should use this period. In addition, if you see that it's a sentence, so multiple clauses, within with around multiple clauses, you need a period. You need punctuation and you need a period. So I'm going to say B is completely wrong and C is going to be the correct answer. All right, number 23. It's going to be testing our grammar. So British scientist P. Wibblerby has observed the Earth is not a very good timekeeper. Earth's slight irregular rotation means that the measurements of time periodically adjusted, specifically an extra leap second is added whenever time based on the planet's rotation lags a full 9/10 of a second. Okay, sweet. So immediately, I don't think there's going to be any punctuation, just because that would be weird. Punctuation, you kind of add a pause. So it's added whenever time based on the planet's rotation lags a full 9/10. So I just personally think that. But honestly, if you really want to break it down, we have added and whenever. So added, what added is it's going to be the added is going to be a verb because to add is a verb. And then whenever is what you call a preposition. And there's a rule. So this is more just of a rule one. You can't really. This also, you can make it make sense in your head. In your head, you would read that very quickly. There would be no pause, therefore no punctuation. But if you have a verb and a preposition, you do not need any punctuation. None. And so, bam, 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 we know that D is the only correct answer. All right, number 24. Bengali author Torudut's His sheaf gleaned in French fields, a volume of English translations and French poems, blank scholars' understanding of the transnational and multilingual context in which Dut lived and worked. All right, so immediately looking at the answer choices, this is testing you on singular versus plural because are enhancing, have enhanced, enhance are all plural. So immediately looking at the answer choices, betting you 50 bucks it's A because that's the only singular one because these are plural verbs. So to enhance is the verb here, and we're arguing over whether it was singular or plural. And I'm going to look, and immediately I think a shelf gleaned in the French fields is going to be the subject that we're talking about because that is what helped enhance scholars' understanding of transnational and multilingual contexts in which lived and worked. So that's going to be our subject, and that's singular. And you can tell because one, it's one book, but they also refer to it as a volume, not volumes of English translations. It's a volume, so that's singular. So it's going to be A. And a good way to figure out whether it's singular is just put it in front of these, like just it. So it are enhancing, no. It have enhanced, no. It enhanced this, it enhanced the room, no. It has enhanced, yes. So if you throw it in front of those, you can pretty much figure out whether what's singular and what's plural. And that's where it's really arguing. And once again, a good rule of thumb with this one is if you can see all of these are the same type, there's a high likelihood that the only one that's singular is going to be the right answer. And also, this can be related to the finite and non finite verbs. Like for the last question earlier in this test, the non finite and the finite, there was only one finite, and the rest were non finite. So you knew that it was the finite one. But once again, that's maybe to save time or double check your work, but always read through. But that's why number A, or letter A is the correct answer for number 24. All right, number 25. This is another grammar question. Journalists have dubbed Gil Scott Heron the godfather of rap, a title that appeared in hundreds of articles about him since the 1990s. Scott Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname, however, feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African American blues music tradition as well as bluesologist, the moniker he preferred. Sweet. So what it looks like it's testing us is how to use however, and the fancy way to say this is that it is a supplementary adverb. So basically you have the main clause above, which is Scott Heron himself resisted the Godfather nickname. You know, it's a main clause because it can stand by itself. He resisted the Godfather nickname. But then you have a supplemental participle phrase. So this is supplemental in the sense of this to exist needs the main clause before it. It's reacting to the main clause. So feeling that it didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African American, like what is it? You need the main phrase, which mentions that the Godfather nickname is it. It didn't encapsulate his devotion to the broader African American blues tradition. So we have a main clause, and then we have the supplemental adverb, which is the however, if you can read that. This is supposed to be the adverb. I'm going to say main clause A for adverb, and then we're going to have the supplemental participle phrase, so SPP. And how do you separate these? So, well, you have the adverb, so you don't really need any heavy punctuation before and after because this is doing the separating for us. And to separate them, you need a comma on both sides. So that's why C is correct because the commas surrounding the however are what separate the MC from the adverb from the supplemental participle phrase, and that is why C is the correct answer. All right, number 26. Once again, it's testing our grammar. From afar, African American fiber artist Bisa Butler's portraits look like paintings. Their depictions of human faces, bodies, and clothing so intricate that it seems only a fine brush could have rendered them. When viewed up close, however, the portraits reveal themselves to be quilts, the stitching barely visible among the thousands of pieces of printed microcut fabric. All right, so I'm going to immediately cross out A. I do not like A. Viewed up close portraits, the portraits reveal themselves to be quilts and the stitching barely visible among thousands of pieces of printed microcut fabric. This and is just not necessary. You can say quilts, the stitching barely visible. I don't like that. A's gone. I definitely don't think C and D are correct because they separate clauses that can stand on their own. That's primarily their purpose. But if you look at it, the stitching barely visible among the thousands of pieces of printed microcut fabric, that is a sentence that can't stand on its own. It cannot be its own sentence. It's not fully formed. It needs to be attached to this when viewed up close, however, the portraits reveal themselves to be quilts, the stitching barely visible. You can say when viewed up close the portraits reveal themselves to be quilts, period. The stitching barely visible among the thousands of pieces of printed microcut fabric. But the stitching, etc., can't stand on its own. So you know it's B. And if I was going to break that down a little further, the convention being tested is the separation of a main clause, which is what I said, where it's a sentence that can stand on its own, and a supplemental phrase. So a supplemental phrase can't stand on its own. So you're doing main clause, supplemental phrase. You need a comma there, but you don't need a semicolon or a period. That's too much punctuation. You just need a comma. So a comma separates those, and that's why B is the correct answer. And number 27, we're looking at which completes the text with the most logical transition. So most coniferous trees belong to the phylum Conifera fabaita are evergreen. That is, they keep their green leaves or needles year round. However, not all conifer species are evergreen. Large trees, I would say for example is what pops into my head. For example, but I like for instance large trees, for instance, because this is just an example of that proving that not all conifer species are evergreen. So I like that. And then you would say, nevertheless, no. Yeah, that just doesn't make sense because it's not contradicting the sentence stated before it. It's agreeing with it. So no. And then meanwhile, no, not at the same time. Because you can't really say not all conifer species are evergreen, and at the same time, large trees lose their needles every fall. That makes no sense. And then it's not in addition. It's not adding to a list. It's he's saying not all conifer species are evergreen, and adding to that, large trees are, that doesn't make sense. So A is going to be the correct answer because it's more just of an example of the what is stated in the sentence before it. All right, number 28. Let's read the question before we get into this because how you do these questions is definitely read this so you know what to look for when you're reading the bullet points. So the student wants to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Malouf. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information? Okay, so he wants to describe the rocking chair to people who don't know who Sam is. So he's probably going to have to mention who Sam is and then describe the rocking chair. So Sam Malouf was an American woodworker and furniture designer. That's probably going to be included because that's describing him. Okay, this does too. He was the son of Lebanese immigrants and he received a genius grant from John Dean and Catherine MacArthur Foundation. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts owns a rocking chair. I would say this one's probably not going to be included. That doesn't talk about who Sam Malouf is. The armrest and seat of the chair are sleek and contoured with a back consisting of 7 spindle-like slats. So this is more just describing the chair. So let's read. With a sleek contoured armrest and the seat, walnut rocking chair in Boston Museums of Fine Arts was just one piece of furniture created by. No, because this doesn't really describe who Sam Malouf is. These people don't know who he is. We need to tell them. Sam Malouf was born in 1916, died in 2009, and then during his life he made a chair that you can see. Nope, this just states how long he lived, and then he made a chair. Not very descriptive of who he is. C. Furniture designer Sam Malouf was a recipient of a Genius Grant. Okay, this kind of talks about who he is. So, I mean, it mentions he's a furniture designer, was a recipient of the John D. Catherine T. Grant. Not loving it. The rocking chair is made from walnut and has been shaped. This is definitely wrong. C kind of stinks. Hmm. He wants to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Malouf. Here. You know what? It's never too late to change your mind. I'm definitely against B, but let's bring back A here. Why could A be the right answer? Because I'm not feeling C. I think C's wrong, and I think A's right. You know what? I go back on my word. I think A's right because he describes the chair and he talks about one piece of furniture created by American woodworker Sam Malouf. So he does both. He wants to describe the rocking chair to an audience unfamiliar with Sam Malouf. Well, he describes the chair and he mentions who Sam Malouf is. Maybe not in the detail as if he only spoke about Sam Malouf, but he achieves both objectives in the question. So actually, A is the correct answer, and that's the reason why. All right, number 29. When you see the bullet point questions like this, always read the question first so you know what to look for. Student wants to emphasize the decline in unique apple varieties in the US and specify why this decline occurred. Which choice effectively uses relevant information in the notes to accomplish this goal? So let's understand the goal. Let's talk about how it declines and why it happened. That's what we're going to be looking for. So in the late 1890s, over 14,000 unique varieties of apples were grown in the US. The rise of industry agriculture in the mid 1900s narrowed the range. So this could be the why. Thousands of apple varieties considered less suitable for commercial growth were lost. Okay, that's pretty good. And today, only 18 apple varieties dominate the market. 90% of apple purchases in the US. The Lost Apple Project, based in Washington State, attempts to find and grow lost apple varieties. Sweet. So, I mean, immediately I can see these two as the why. This could be a comparison for before and after. Now, there used to be 14,000. Now, 15 are left. And I guess this could be like what's being done about it. But I don't know if that's necessarily relevant to his goal. So, the Lost Apple Project is dedicating to finding some of the apple varieties lost following a shift in agricultural practices. Nah, that doesn't really talk about it's. It doesn't mention why. So it talks about that it did decline, but not why. So while over 14,000 apple varieties were grown in the U.S. in the late 1890s, only 15 varieties make up most of the apples sold today. It doesn't answer why, so B is out. Since the rise of industrial agriculture, U.S. farmers have mainly grown the same few unique apple varieties, resulting in the loss of thousands of varieties less suitable for commercial growth. I like it. As industrial agriculture rose to prominence in the 1900s, the number of crops selected for cultivation. Nah, this doesn't even talk about apples. The D is out. C is the only answer we have left. It's okay. I like it. Um, because it talks about industrial agriculture since the rise. Yeah. And then it talks about how the loss of the variety, and it implies that it's because of industrial agriculture. So C is going to be correct. All right, number 30. With bullet point questions, always read what you're supposed to look for before you start reading the bullet points. So the student wants to introduce their artist's 1983 poetry collection. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information to accomplish this? So this is the goal. He wants to introduce the 1983 poetry collection. So Cecilia was a multidisciplinary artist. Her solo art exhibition Pinturas, Poemas y Expresiones was shown at the Museo Nacional. Oh my gosh. Her poetry created collection was published. Poetry collection published. She lives part time in Chile where she was born. That's useless information. Useless information. He wants to do the 1983 poetry collection, so he wants to introduce this one. This is the 1983 poetry collection. All right. So before she published these 1983 books, Estan, she exhibited visual art. I don't think that's right because it kind of mentions the 1983 poetry. It doesn't really talk about it or introduce it very well. She is a true multidisciplinary artist whose works include numerous poetry. This doesn't even mention it. Published in 1983 by Tandem Press. It's a collection of poetry by multidisciplinary artist Cecilia. Okay, that's pretty good. And then 1971 exhibited for his solo. So this doesn't even talk about it. So C is the correct answer because it is the only one talking about the 1983 poems other than A, and A barely mentions it. This one talks about who wrote it, that it's a collection of poetry by a multidisciplinary artist. So C is going to be the correct answer for 30. All right, number 31. Once again, for these bullet point questions, always read the question before you attack the bullet points. The student wants to emphasize the study's methodology. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish the goal? So his goal is to explain the study's methodology or how they conducted the study. Always know what this word means. I've seen many questions with that word, so make sure you know that they're referring to how the study was conducted. What methodology did they use? So, which choice most effectively uses the rest? Okay, so let's read this and pay attention for the methodology. When medical students mention their patients on social media, they may violate patient confidentiality. Not too much info there. Terry Kine led a study to determine how many medical schools have student policies that mention social media use. Okay, so purpose of the study. Kind and her team reviewed 132 medical school websites examining publicly available student policies. Yes, this is how they conducted this study. They looked at 132 websites. And what they found is only 13 medical schools had guidelines explicitly mentioning social media, and only 5 define what constitutes as acceptable social media. So these are the findings. So that's the purpose, methodology, and the findings, and then just extraneous info. Looking at the answer choices, let's look at A. The student policies of 132 medical schools can be found online, according to research by Terry Kind. I'm not loving that one. It mentions the methodology, but doesn't really explain that it was a part of this study. It's just stating it. So I'm not loving A. B, to find out how many medical schools have guidelines about social media use, Terry Kind and her team examined the student policies of 132 medical schools. I like that one. That maybe not is, yeah, that's the purpose and that's how they achieved it. So I like B. C, out of 132 medical schools, only 13 had student policies that mention social media. Nah, that's just kind of restating the findings of the study, not the methodology. Terry Kind and her team wanted to know how many medical schools have student social media policies in place. This is the purpose. So answer is B. This is really just the purpose. This was the findings. And this was just stating info. B is really the only one that talks about the purpose and how they achieved it, which is the methodology. So B is going to be the correct answer for 31. Okay, number 32. When looking at these bullet point problems, I want y'all to remember, read the question first. Student wants to emphasize the duration and purpose of Cohen's and Rodriguez's work. All right, so we're looking to emphasize the duration and purpose, emphasize of the work. which effectively uses relevant information to accomplish this goal. All right, well, let's read the relevant information. The Gula are a group of African Americans who have lived in parts of southeastern United States in the 18th century. Gula culture is influenced by West African and Central African traditions. Louise Miller Cohen is a Gula historian, storyteller, and preservationist. She founded the Gula Museum of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina in 2003. Rodriguez is a Gula historian, artist, and preservationist, and she founded the Gula Museum of Georgetown, South Carolina in 2003. Okay, so we're talking about this is Cohen. This is what she did. She founded this. This is Rodriguez, and this is what she founded. Oh, so they're both girls. And then we're looking for what emphasizes the duration and purpose of Cohen's work. Okay, so the purpose is to preserve their history, to tell it and preserve it. Historian, storyteller, and preservationist. That implies their purpose pretty well. And they founded a museum about that stuff. So that's how they did it. At the Gula Museums in the Hilton Head Island in Georgetown, South Carolina, visitors can learn more about the Gula people who have lived in the region for centuries. No, this does not emphasize the duration and purpose. It just more talks about the museums and that people can go to them. Louise Miller and Cohen and Rodriguez have worked to preserve the culture of the Gula people who have lived in the United States in the 18th century. I think this is kind of half right. It doesn't really mention the duration, but it could be. I'm not loving it. Since 2003, Louise Miller Cohen and Vermil Rodriguez have worked to preserve Gula culture throughout their museums. Okay, yeah. So I like C. It talks a little bit more about they work to preserve it and they do it through their museums. So and since 2003, so you got the duration here, purpose. Yeah, I like that. Influenced the traditions of West and Central Africa. Culture developed in parts of. Nah, it's just information about the culture. Hmm. I think B's out. B doesn't really mention the duration at all, while C does. And they both mention that it's to preserve the culture. So while this is half right, C is the best answer. So that's why I'm going to choose it for 32. All right, number 33. And as always, with the bullet points, read the question first so you know what to look for. The student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Okay, that's the student's goal is to emphasize the aim of the research study. So we need to find the aim of the research study in the first place. So let's look. North America woodlands have expanded to areas that were once grasslands. Cool. Thomas Rogers and Russell of Wichita State University investigated whether woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. Okay, so that's the purpose of the study. Could be the aim of it. Rogers, Rogers and Russell analyzed core samples of the oak trees on a site that was not wooded in the past and indexed the age of the trees with historical climate data to see if tree populations and climate were correlated. Okay, this is the methodology. This is how they did it. Tree population growth was associated with dry intervals. This is their findings. Droughts may have play a role in woodland expansion. This is the conclusion. These were the findings, and this is their inference of it. Sweet. So I think their aim was to find whether woodland expansion is related to changes in climate, and they did it by analyzing core samples of areas that were not wooded in the past. So let's look. Thomas Rogers and Russell, researchers at Wichita, wanted to know if woodland expansion is related to changes in climate. Well, I like that. That's the aim, right? To discuss whether it was related to climate. B. Thanks to the work done by Rogers and Russell, we now know that droughts may have played a role in woodland expansion. Nah, that's wrong. That's the findings, not the aim. C. Wichita State University researchers have determined that tree population growth was associated with. Nope, just restating B in a worse way, honestly. So that's out because it's talking about the findings and the conclusion rather than the aim of the study. So Thomas Rogers and Russell analyzed core samples from oak tree on a site that was not wooded in the past, indexing the age of trees with. Nope, that's the methodology. That's not the aim. That's just how they found information to solve the point of their study, their hypothesis. So We know that A is the correct answer for 33.